break. So we're going to get back into it. And I'd like to introduce our next amazing speaker. For the past 10 years, our next speaker, Inge Tielen, has worked in Indonesia as conservation manager at the Wanicare Foundation and as the Deputy Director of Life Sciences at Cikananga Wildlife Center. In her role, she was responsible for the development, implementation, and coordination of conservation programs and releases. And in this role, she was able to develop innovative programs, placing the teams at Wanicare and Cikakanga at the forefront of Javan leopard, wreathed hornbill, and otter conservation in Indonesia. Today, Inge will share with us a tool which she developed and applied at Cikananga for disposal decision-making for individual animals, keeping in mind welfare and conservation opportunities, but also allows for clear and effective communication with stakeholders such as government partners. Inge, whenever you're ready, thank you, and you can share your screen.
Hi, yes, I will start now. Thank you very much for the introduction. It should be up now. Yeah. All right. Okay.
Hang on one second. We're just waiting.
Thank you very much.
Sorry, Inge, your presentation hasn't started yet.
Oh, on my screen it says screen sharing.
There we go. Now we've got it.
Ah,
and your
perfect.
sound isn't coming through too well, so maybe turn your video off as well.
Yes, is this better?
Yes, I can hear you quite well now. It was just staticky before.
Okay, so I'll get started. Yeah, like I said, thank you very much for the invitation, and I'm really excited to be sharing this with you all. This is something actually, the decision scoring tool is actually a big Excel file, really boring to present or to share. So I try to make it a bit more interesting and take you along the thought process of everything. So, all right. So the use of the planning tool. Look, I need to reset now, but use it. We start using it when we have new arrivals, or and as you can see here on the photos, these are examples of new arrivals. In some cases, you can start filling in the tool already when you get the animal and you know it for 10 minutes. Sometimes you need to use the quarantine time, or even at the end of the quarantine time, to assess everything correctly to finish the whole Excel file. Sometimes we also use it for housing decisions. So this is more the management side of the center. You have, for example, 3 leopards out of 10 that are showing the best behavior, that are having the best background. For example, they're only there after a short conflict. They have not been in captivity too long. So we also use it to make the right housing decisions for them. So these individuals go to the rehabilitation and closes quicker. And then we also have the moment that there are medical or behavioral changes in the animals. So this is more for the animals that stay for a longer period, sadly, because that happens in multiple rescue centers quite a lot. So when we see a medical change, we take the tool again and we go through the whole list again and see if we need to change the decision that we made before. Behavioral changes, we do the same, although behavioral changes have often a medical reason. So that's why I put it like this. But when we see a behavioral change, we also go back to the tool and see if we need to change a bit on the decision making. So when we go to the options for each that I included in this tool, it would be released by the current institution, so released by us. A conservation program at the current institution. So at Cikananga, it was either conservation breeding program. So at Cikananga, you have songbirds and pig breeding, and around that is a whole conservation program. But what we also have, the rescue center part, we received a lot of leopards, we received a lot of hornbills, and also cassowary, we have many. So we put a whole conservation program around that. So this includes awareness, releases, research, whatever that's necessary, and that can be one big program. Then translocation, which is for, in this case, translocation to another institution. So we have institutions specialized for certain species, or institutions that have more experience with certain species. So this translocation is for the release of a core conservation program at that institution. And you have, of course, sanctuary option, which is necessary. I included zoo because this cannot be forgotten, but this is for each country, of course, a different discussion. And euthanasia, you cannot forget about it, is a very important life planning option when you work with rescued wildlife. When we look at the start of the whole Excel file, the whole tool, one of the most important things which is sometimes forgotten is the origin of the individuals. So when you look at Indonesia, there's a lot of different subspecies. And when you talk about the yellow-crested cockatoo here in the picture, you have around at least 7 subspecies, and each subspecies is from a different area. So before you even start thinking about disposal, you need to be very sure where this individual came from. Another species or animal group where this is a big thing and where Cikananga had a lot of challenges is turtles. Turtles are very specific to its location sometimes, and actually stop the release often because you cannot really know due to limited research and limited resources where these individuals come from. Medical review. So we need to make sure that we know that this animal, the health issues don't interfere with the survival after release. So this is quite a broad factor. I'm now summarizing it because I'm not going to go through each detail, but I hope it gives you an idea how it works. And later, if you're very interested, I'm more than happy to share it with you. No problem at all. So also the behavior review is one of the very important information things before you even start thinking about disposal. And behavioral includes predator avoidance, natural social behavior, species-specific natural behavior. The biggest challenge of this tool is that it needs to be used over a lot of different species. So it is kind of generalized in a way that you're triggered to think or to be critical about what needs to be taken into account. So, for example, this Javan hawk eagle was one of the things where the medical and behavioral review was interesting, where we got the condition score. Behaviorally, he was perfect for release, but medically, he sadly wasn't. In the photo, you can maybe see that he has one dropped wing. So he has a dislocated wing, shoulder joint. So this is all just to show you how it's all very important to know even before you start talking about disposal. Now I'll go to each disposal option separately so that you can know a bit more about variables that are included. Once again, this might differ per country a bit or per situation, but this is how I made it in. So one of the variables that we are scoring is there a release program or site available? So does Cikananga have actually a program for an eagle? Do we know any release sites where this eagle can go to, for example? And this is actually basically a scoring of 0 and 0, 0, 1. So it's very easy and a bit black and white. If you're not sure, I always make a color, which means I need to go back to that. The condition score, what I just said, to be able to release it, we need to make sure that the condition is perfect. So we can only release the animal if everything is fine. So this is very vital. Zoonosis free, something that cannot be forgotten, and this is why I included it separately. We need to make sure there are no diseases in the animal. So this is one of the variables very important for the release. Rehabilitation facilities available. So you cannot even consider releasing an animal if you don't have the appropriate rehabilitation facilities, in my opinion. So you can only start thinking about release when you have this expertise available. And this is actually everything included with the rehabilitation process, but also the release in itself, the whole method, and monitoring. So what we have here is, at the end, we say 5 out of 5 is the minimum score to release. Sometimes you miss something, as in we don't have the expertise. As Ian said, you reach out to experts to make sure you can do this appropriately. Or we have a release program, but the site is not available yet. Okay, well, we can solve that by putting resources into it when available. So an example from Cikananga is the hornbill program we received in 2000. I'm not sure not anymore. Let's say 17, we received 13 hornbills. There was nothing in Indonesia for this species. So we didn't have a 5 out of 5 score, but we did see a lot of options. So we started a release program for these guys. Conservation program. So one very important thing is conservation priority. So you can't say endangered and critically endangered, but there's more to it. If there are IUCN specialist groups saying species needs more attention, it's also a conservation priority. The state is not always binding, because sometimes you have local hornbills. Well, like the local situation is different from the global situation. Facilities available. When you start a conservation program, you need to have appropriate enclosures, everything, clinic. It needs to be top-notch to be able to start a conservation program. Also, you don't start a conservation program when you just have one individual of that species. That's not very effective. So other individuals are at your institution. Once again, expertise available, very important. And another one, species strategic plan. So without a strategic plan, you cannot start a program to actually have a positive influence on the conservation status. And financial ability, sponsor interest. So conservation programs cost a lot of money. So you need to be sure that you have a long-term commitment to make sure that you can actually run the program. Another example from Cikananga is the Javan green magpie. Here again, 6 out of 6 to start a conservation program, but here an extra note that conservation priority, sponsor interests, and other individuals are minimum requirements. So if you're missing something, you can maybe look into solving it, but these 3 I took as minimum requirement to even look into realizing a conservation program. Translocation for release or conservation program. So is there a specialized center available? It's an easy question to ask. Often it's sadly not available, but for the species on this slide, we luckily do have that in Indonesia. Does it have a conservation contribution? I added this because in Indonesia, you also have private institutions or private breeders, as they call it, that claim to do conservation programs. I need to work out what I'm saying, but that's why I added conservation contribution. Is it part of a bigger picture instead of just localized? Very important also for us is, before we consider translocation, do we know that welfare will be improved? If welfare is not improved, we even don't consider it. And back to origin. I included this mainly for Indonesia because there are so many different islands, and we need to make sure that these species go to the right island for the conservation output. Here is the advice: 4 out of 4 translocation requests will be activated as soon as receiving party can receive the individual. This is something that you might see as well, that you might have a location where it needs to go, can go, but receiving party isn't ready yet. So that's why I added like this. Sanctuary, disease and zoonosis free. Disease can be a bit, zoonosis is more important, of course. You don't want to have an animal with zoonosis risk in your sanctuary. So that's why I added like this. Zoonosis, of course, is also very important with the cultivation breeding. but in this case, we took it as a variable. There is an experienced sanctuary available, something which is often not the case, but added it here. We have the minimum standard facilities, and there are no other recommendations. This is added because the recommendations, release, conservation program, or translocation are, of course, preferred to sanctuary. You want to have another outcome for your rescued animal. So only when those three options are not an option, you go to sanctuary zoo or a sanctuary or zoo. Important here is that I added when sanctuary elsewhere is not available, which is often the case. It's time to start working with your network to realize long-term high-quality sanctuary, either at your place or at other places. So a good example is here also with Irna again. We talked a lot about this. They work with wind homes. We had a lot of wind homes. We cannot house anymore, and we have some for sanctuary, some for release. So in that case, you start talking with each other and saying, can we help each other out? Can we help you with something, and you can help us with wind homes? And that's how we work with the network. So trying to find solutions together. That's most important here. The zoo, I find this a good disposal option. But there are a lot of buts to it. You need to make sure that the welfare is preserved, and each country this is different. But we at Cikananga do have we put energy in getting a network with zoos in Indonesia, get to know the ones that we can work together with, and together again you can make it, improve it. So we have some zoos that we work together with, all for the benefit for the animal. So for the zoo option, of course, you want to make sure that you have what I call a tame individual, not scared by people. What you have with rescued animals, of course, is that animals could be tame, but you also have animals that, and we had that with Siamang, for example, it's tame, but it's also stressed by human attention. It was a depends on the individual, but so this needs to be critically assessed. Zoonosis free, better or equal welfare standards. Once again, we need to make sure that the welfare is preserved. So it either gets the same, better at where it's going, and minimum standard facilities, just to make sure that you're ticking all the boxes. So this one is quite interesting because you don't know all the facilities at the zoos, which means actually that you're obligated to go to zoos to check out how they're taking care of the animals and what kind of facilities they have. So this is also included in my work, going to these facilities, going to zoos, and also starting the conversation, looking at the facilities and etc. And once again, no other recommendations. Here, 5 out of 5 needs to advise translocation to zoo. Euthanasia, something which is, again, I think in all countries a bit differently. In Indonesia, it's not seen as a management option, but it will be used when there are zoonosis risks. However, when animal welfare cannot be safeguarded in captivity, is one of the variables that you need to include. If you cannot preserve it, you need to start making maybe difficult decisions. And when there's a zoonosis risk, so the bird on the slide has parrot feather disease. So this is sadly a very common problem nowadays in Indonesia. A lot of parrots have this issue. So I would say most of the confiscations that we have now have these kind of diseases in it. This is one example. In Indonesia, you are now allowed to euthanize the animal when they are tested positive for it, which is quite impressive. And that this is possible because the risk for the population in your facility, but also outside, is big. However, it's an ongoing discussion, which is a topic for another time. but zoonosis risk is one of them. And here the score is when it's above 0. So when you have one for animal welfare cannot be safeguarded and there's no possibility to improve it, euthanasia is advised. So this one is actually the one that causes the main discussions, but I believe looking at it with people, with the management team, with the vets, you sit together, you talk about this, and then you come to the best decisions together, because these decisions should be made lightly. And then the communication to the stakeholders. Here we go with a big table. So this is the summarized version. So this is what can be sent on a monthly basis to everyone that wants to know. So in this case, the government. So that means that you have actually a recommendation for each individual at your facility. The government knows, okay, so they have already a slider for a zoo. The zoo is asking for turtles. You know what? This facility has this turtle, so we could recommend it. But what's also important when you talk about releases, for example, we're talking about the Javan leopard cat. When we do an application for release, we add the full decision-making line in there, and we can comment or make notes on each score to actually explain why what is decided. The same as for the Javan hawk eagle. This is for the Javan hawk eagle with the dislocated wing shoulder. So translocation to a conservation program is recommended. At the moment, sanctuary is the only possibility. So this is a bit how we communicated all to everyone. This whole tool was also shared with the government in Indonesia. They were very happy to see how we were trying to make the decision making a bit organized in a way that everybody could understand. Of course, they have different opinions, and you have, of course, the big thing, which is different knowledge and awareness points, which I'm getting now to. But most important is the network. So you cannot have a proper disposal or without a network. So you as one institution, you cannot achieve what you want, what you need to do alone. And I think that's something that comes back all the time today. There are so many species, and there's no way you can know it all. So once again, depending on the network. Awareness and knowledge. So this tool was also shared with institutions, with people, with students, just to actually open the mind, as in also with the government. Before we make a decision, we need to make certain things clear. We need to make sure that this is happening and this is happening, and there are no other options possible. So once again, this is starting to open up discussion, sharing the difficulties and the challenges when working with animals and talking about release. Once again, difficult decisions, they will always, if it starts to be, if you have animals that you want to release, but you see in their medical review or behavioral review, it's not possible. It's always a difficult decision to say it needs to be sanctuary. This is not why you're working in this field, but with having this tool behind you, you actually can communicate easier to everyone why this decision was made. So it's actually giving you a hold to share your decision. Okay, well, that was that. Thank you very much. And once again, if you're interested, I'm more than happy to share the Excel file, but I didn't want to put it on screen right today because it's a bit much. So I hope that the presentation today had a bit of information to know how it works. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much for that, Inge. That was it's challenging. You raised some challenging and uncomfortable things for some people, such as considering euthanasia or moving animals to a zoo. It's a challenge, and we are at the forefront of conservation and welfare, and these are resource limited environments. So unless Jeff Bezos is watching today and doesn't want to go to the moon anymore and give us a lot of money, we need to have these tools and decision making, the ability to make decisions clearly of where to put our resources. Sorry, I've just lost my screen for a second. Inge, we do have some questions for you if you're still there.
Yes.
Firstly, if transferring an animal for permanent placement at another facility, such as a zoo or another rescue center, do you enter into some sort of agreement about the animal's future, such as specific minimum standards, and what happens if the facility changes hands or closing, or where that animal may move to, or they make a decision to move to in the future?
Yeah, very good question. And when we're talking about zoos, I can say that we have quite zoos that we work together with, where we translated animals to. We have a very personal contact. So we visit them, we can go to them unannounced, even if we want to, but we now have such a relationship that we trust them. But this is one of the things that when we start talking with zoos, and we visit you, and we be informed about what's happening with the animal, etc. So this creates some kind of trust, basically. What happens when something closes? Well, this is also, it happens and didn't happen yet. So not sure, but for me, most importantly is making sure you have a good relationship with all the institutions that you work together with. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think one thing that's important to note for a lot of sanctuaries and rescue centers, and why this tool is so important, is often you don't get to make that choice yourself. You don't have ownership of those animals. Those animals may belong to the state. They may own to the government. So this tool is particularly important that you can try and get the best outcomes for those animals when you don't have much control yourself. We did have some technical issues, obviously, before, and some people missed the information about the tool. They wanted to know who developed it, and is it freely accessible?
Oh yeah, I made it just because during the daily work, I noticed that making the decisions for each individual is challenging, and I needed something to work with that I can actually check myself and communicate with others why decisions are made. So this Excel file, it's basically just an Excel file. There is an online version made by a student once, but this is not fully functioning, but that's an idea for later if possible. I'm more than happy to share it, although I think with that moment, it's nice to have a call that I can actually explain a bit more about the exact Excel file, because this is just basically a thought process. But I'm happy to share for sure.
Awesome, thank you. I was just thinking then to myself, this may be a good future workshop opportunity for anyone who's interested. We could host another event in the future where you run through it live online in with an animal, so that people can see how it really works. Do you or should the scoring variables for release of site take into account local perceptions of releasing animals in the area? Sometimes there can be negative perceptions about releasing animals and the consequences of the presence these animals may have on local livelihoods.
Yeah, 100%, 100%. Like, we also have crocodiles, and not everybody's happy to receive those. So basically, we score it as a release site when all these boxes are ticked. We cannot pick a release site box without knowing that we can actually we can do the education, that we're not sure that everybody's on board. We're talking about the management of the area, but also, of course, the local communities need to be on board with the plan. So before you take off, yes, we have a release site. This needs to be made sure. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you very much for that, Inge. I know we had a few challenges there with